We will be starting in just a minute. Captain Narayan, are you ready?
Yes, Mrs. Sarapur.
Okay, we shall start then. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Mumbai Research Center of the Asiatic Society of Mumbai, we present today a talk called The Blazing Inferno, Raging Conflagration, the Bombay Dock Explosion of 1944. This is an online talk by Captain Mohan Narayan, Indian Navy retired. Captain Mohan Narayan, Indian Navy retired and alumnus of the National Defence Academy, Pune, was commissioned into the Indian Navy on 01 July 1978. A communications and electronic warfare specialist, he has held a number of staff appointments both afloat and ashore. Commander Captain Narayan has had the privilege of being the longest serving curator of the Maritime History Society, Mumbai, from 10th February 2000 to 15th May 2015. In that, planned, organized, and conducted the million lecture programs of the Society, field research, annual seminars, and publishing activities. 18 of the 20 books published by the MHS on India's maritime past heritage were during his work. He was also a part of the team that set up the Maritime Heritage Exhibition at Mumbai during the first ever International Fleet Review in 2001. The restoration of the Bombay Castle, heritage walks of the 500-year-old naval dockyard, the Maritime Museum on board the Vikrant, the memorial at Cooperage in honor of the naval uprising of 1946, and the Ballard Bandar Museum. In 2011, he curated Maritime Heritage Exhibition, which was held as part of the President's Fleet Review at the CSMVS. Formerly the Prince of Wales. After relinquishing charge of the MHS in 2015, Captain Narayan remains actively engaged in his pursuit and promotion of maritime history and heritage. So, with that, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Sarapur, and good evening, everybody. At the outset, please let me thank the organization of the Asiatic Society for inviting me to deliver this talk. Always a pleasure to talk at the Asiatic. I have a problem with my internet, so I will go off the video so that enough bandwidth is available. But you will hear my audio, and for the Q&A, I'll have my video on. Can you see my presentation, Mrs. Tarapu?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. This talk is dedicated to all those who lost their lives in the unfortunate accident on 14 November 1944, especially, I beg your pardon, 14th April 1944, especially those 66 firemen who gave up their lives in the line of duty so that rest of Bombay could live. We owe them a great debt. I will start this evening's presentation with a clip from YouTube, which will put today's talk in perspective.
Bombay, gateway to India, and Signal Corps films of one of the worst disasters in India's history. A mysterious fire on a Liberty ship carrying munitions. Then a terrific explosion that scatters flame and destruction throughout the harbor area. 70 men and 7 engines of the Bombay Fire Brigade disappeared without trace on the docks. The first of 2 huge blasts hurled one 4,000-ton ship up on the wharf. and rained debris and white-hot steel over Bombay, starting fires that destroyed whole sections of the city. Fire through 3 days and nights makes 50,000 homeless. Bombay's formerly peaceful streets present the appearance of an earthquake. Whole blocks are blown flat, and pieces of the ship lie thousands of yards from the dock area. Property damage over $150 million, 1,040 injured, 336 dead. 20 minutes later, another explosion. Hundreds of miles from any battlefront, Bombay feels the hot and deadly hand of war.
In the voiceover, the narrator goes on to say that this fire which caused this explosion was a mysterious one. All fires, mysterious or otherwise, have a definite cause. So what was the cause of this fire which resulted in this huge loss of life and property? Was it because of enemy sabotage action? Because please remember, in April 1944, the Second World War was very much on, and Bombay, being an important staging post for the British, was a juicy target for the enemy. Or then, was it because of an honest mistake and therefore an aberration? Or then, was it because of another of man's unending follies? To get to the bottom of this, please let me take you to where it all began. Most stories of the sea have a ship as its protagonist, and this evening's tale, being a maritime one, is no different. The protagonist of this evening's tale, or prima donna if you prefer that term, was the SS Steichen. This image is a little pixelated, but unfortunately, this is the only image available of the Steichen. Officially, the United States entered the Second World War on 7th of December 1941, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. But vicariously, they were into the conflict right from March 1941, when the Congress, at the behest of President Roosevelt, passed the Lend-Lease Act, under which America could provide war material and any other stores for the defense of the Allied forces. Accordingly, under the Lend-Lease Act, 26 ships of the Ford class were built across 12 shipyards in Canada. The SS Fort Steichen was one of them. She was built in the Prince Rupert shipyard of Vancouver in British Columbia and named after a river of that province. These are the features of Steichen: the length and breadth in meters and feet. Beam is the width. Tonnage, both GRT and NRT for people who are not familiar with nautical terms. The gross registered tonnage, as GRT, is a total internal volume of a ship. And the total internal volume minus the machinery spaces, the living spaces, etc., which will result in only the cargo holds and the cargo carrying capacity of the ship, is called net registered tonnage. For a merchant ship, it is the revenue earning capacity of that ship. 5 holes. You will come across this term holes over and over again in this presentation. Holes is nothing but a compartment in which goods are carried. Steichen had 5 holes from forward to aft. Hole number 1 hole number 2, hole number 3 between these two structures, hole number 4, and hole number 5. 5 holes. She had a draft of 27 feet. Draft is that part of the ship from the water line to the keel. This is important for navigational aspects. She was a steam propelled ship. Steam was made by burning coal. Do an average speed of 10 knots. Lloyd's classification is like all ships have to be registered, just like motor cars have to be registered, ships have to be registered. And the most popular agency for classifying ships was Lloyd's of London. And this mark which you see here, this means Steichen was surveyed twice. Once when she was being constructed and once after the construction was over. Normally, ships are surveyed only once after completion, but Steichen was surveyed twice. 100A means she met every specification of Lloyd's. And 1 was the state of her anchor and cable. In short, she was A1 ship. This aspect is important because what happened 2 years later could not be blamed on the Steichen. She was no ocean greyhound, but a steady ship. She was registered in the Port of London in 1942. Under the Lend-Lease Act, after the ship was completed in May 1942, the United States handed over the ship to Britain. And from July 1942 to early February 1944, Steichen made 4 voyages between European ports and between Europe and ports in America, ferrying war stores. And by early February 1944, she was at Birkenhead on the west coast of England, loading for a 5th and what would turn out to be her last voyage. This is Birkenhead on the west coast of England. And this blown up area is here. This is Birkenhead here. This whole area is called Merseyside because the river Mersey empties into the Irish Sea here, and it's along this estuary. There are a whole lot of ports, Ellesmere, Birkenhead, Wellesley, Liverpool. The 2 most important ports are Liverpool and Birkenhead. Interestingly, when the Bombay Port Trust was formed in 1873, the regulations for the Bombay Port Trust was based on the regulations of Merseyside ports. Between Birkenhead and Liverpool, Liverpool was a more important port, especially during the war years. She was more important than even London. Even today, Liverpool is a far more important port than London. But people of a certain generation might remember Liverpool for something entirely different. It gave the world of music the original Fat Four. But today is not about music, it's about things more prosaic. So back to Birkenhead. This is the modern port of Birkenhead. Not too much of difference, except that more wharfage and infrastructures come up. Otherwise, she remains the same. At Birkenhead, Steichen was loading cargo. I beg your pardon. Before I come to that, there are people who are mariners here, so please bear with me. But this is for the information of those who might not have a maritime background. So I will explain this term hold because you'll keep hearing this term over and over again in this presentation. In the lower figure is what you see, a top view of a bulk carrier. These are the 5 holes. This is not the Steichen, but this is only representative. But Steichen also had 5 holes. That's why I'm taking this one. 5 holes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What you see here are the hatches. Once the cargo is loaded, the hatches close so that it becomes watertight and there is no ingress of water at sea. What you see on top is a side view. Now, this is a hold. And in the stacking, the hold was divided into two parts. Each hold was divided into two parts, the upper hold and the lower hold. This is the hatch. There was a hatch on top. There was a hatch at the bottom of the lower hold also, so that also could be closed when the ship was at sea. What you see here is the bilges. Bilges is an important part of the waste management of the ship, and all slush and overflow from the ship is collected in these bilges, treated before it is flushed out. Normally, the slush is thrown out through these valves. Valves open only one way, from outside to the sea, so that there's no ingress of water into the holes. What you see here are the cranes of each hold had a crane so that discharging could take place when in harbor. This is what a typical bulk carrier will look when she's loaded. Here this particular ship is carrying coal, filled with coal. Once it is filled and she goes out to sea, before going out to sea, these hatches are closed so that the holes become watertight and there is no ingress of water. What was Steichen loading at Birkenhead? She was loading dangerous and glamorous cargo. The dangerous cargo was for Karachi and the glamorous cargo for Bombay. At Karachi, she was loading girders in CKD condition in crates strewn across the upper deck. This is what a typical glider would look when assembled. Sorry. Then she was carrying 12 Spitfire fighters in CKD condition. This was placed in all the 5 holds. This is what a Spitfire fighter aircraft would look when fully assembled. A very iconic aircraft. And she was carrying 400 tons of ammunition and explosives. This is normally how explosives are packed in crates. They might be wooden or they might be iron. In this case, it was wooden crates. For Bombay, she was carrying 1,325 tons of explosives. The different kinds of explosives are given on the slide. In the number 2 hold, she was carrying 124 gold bars. These gold bars were packed in 31 crates. So 31 crates, each having 124 gold bars, each weighed 28 pounds, and the total weight was 3,472 pounds. Since we are more familiar with the metric system, I've given it in kilograms also. A little more than 1.5 tons of kilograms. Each gold had a serial number and had the hallmark of Bank of England. This gold was being carried from London, from Birkenhead to Bombay as part payment of Britain's wartime debt to India. They were procured at 17 shillings an ounce from South Africa, but the same gold, when it was shipped to India, it was valued at 340 shillings per ounce. In terms of pounds, when procured from South Africa, 40,000 pounds was the total cost of the consignment. But when it was sent to India, it was valued at 8,89,000 pounds. It was financial jugglery at its devious best. This being wartime, after the loading was over, Psyche's destination was known to very few people. It was known to certain port officials. It was known to the ship's crew, of course, they knew about it. And strangely, anybody on the jetty and was careful to watch as crates marked Karachi and Bombay were being loaded onto the ship. So much for wartime security. During Second World War, merchant ships never sailed independently. They were sailed in a convoy which was supported by warships. So this is a typical Second World War convoy forming up before sailing out. The passage of Birkenhead from Karachi, from Birkenhead, sorry, I beg your pardon, the passage of Steichen from Birkenhead to Karachi. She left Birkenhead in a convoy on 24th February 1944, sailed down the Irish Sea into the English Channel. It was a 50-ship convoy which left Birkenhead into the Atlantic, and off Gibraltar, the convoy split. The major part of the convoy went south along the west coast of Africa, and 20 ships of the convoy proceeded east towards the Strait of Gibraltar, where she was joined by another convoy from the US. This reformed convoy passed through the Strait of Gibraltar and off Algiers on 9th April, at dusk 9th April 1944, 9th March 1944, she came under a German air raid attack by German Stuka bombers. Fortunately, it was repulsed with no great loss of life or property. The convoy continued eastward, and off Sicily, one part of the convoy went on to the agency, and the rest of the convoy, 12 ships, which in this reformed convoy, proceeded east towards the Suez Canal and proceeded east into the Mediterranean, past the Suez Canal, and reached Port Tawfiq or Tawfiq on 23rd March 1944, where she stopped 2 days for bunkering. Bunkering is a term again peculiar to maritime activities. When the ship takes in fuel, in this case, she was taking in coal. After a 2-day halt at Port Tawfiq, she continued down into the Red Sea, reached Aden, the great coaling port of Aden, on 27 March 1944, stayed there for a couple of hours to again top up coal, left the evening of 27th March to arrive at Karachi on 30th March 1944. So in short, a 35-day passage from Birkenhead to Karachi, largely uneventful, except for a small hiccup off the coast of Algiers. The attack, but not too much of damage, and she reached intact at Karachi on 30th March 1944. At Karachi, all the stores that were embarked for Karachi was offloaded between 3 p.m. 30th March and 8 a.m. 3rd April. And this left a huge cavernous empty space of 286,000 cubic feet, which required to be filled up with cargo. Now, before I go into what was actually loaded at Karachi, the regulations which governed loading of cargo during Second World War, I'm just giving you the references. Now, with respect to these regulations, What was loaded at Karachi? Cotton. Cotton could be loaded on ships, but not in proximity to lubricating oil or grease, because that would cause spontaneous combustion. Earlier, there was a belief that wet cotton was combustible, but that was erroneous. But wet cotton was not carried on board ships because it would rot very easily, and therefore it was avoided. Lubricating oil, it had to be carried in drums and barrels which were not leaking. Maximum 250 drums could be carried in one hold. If you're embarking ammunition along with cotton and lube oil, they could not be placed in the same hold. It had to be in opposite loads, opposite holds. Aircraft dope is nothing but lacquer. Lacquer was used on aircrafts having fiber because it made it airtight and tensile. The most popular form of most popular dope was gun cotton, which was basically nitrocellulose. This is a highly inflammable material. So same restrictions as loading ammunition. If you're embarking lube oil, then should not be in the same hold as cotton and lubricating oil. Sorry, if you're embarking aircraft dope, you couldn't put it in the same hold as in cotton and lube oil. Timber, not in the same hold as explosives, self-explanatory. Scrap iron, avoid placing it in holes having explosives. Sulfur, really no restrictions except don't place it in the same hold as you're keeping edible cargo. No restrictions except that adequate security cover should be given. Dry fish manure, rice resin, no restrictions except factors affecting ship's stability. This is the cargo which went into Stykene at Karachi. And how were they placed? Cotton, 1,400 tons of cotton in hold 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 4, 5. Lubricating oil, 10,976 drums in 1, 2, 3, 5. Remember, the restriction was you couldn't load more than 250 drums of lubricating oil in a hold. In every hold, this quantity was exceeded. Explosives were placed in the same hold as cotton and lubricating. 1,395 tons of explosives. Sulfur, 9,000 bags for 325 tons, number one hold. Timber, 27,000 pieces kept in the same hold where you had cotton and lubricating oil. Aircraft dope, that's a lacquer which we're talking about. 20 tons in number 3 hold, which also had lubricating oil, which also had explosives. Gold bars in number 2 hold, not an issue. And miscellaneous items, the balance part was of 100 tons in 4 holds. In short, when cargo was loaded at Karachi, every norm, every restriction was flouted. Why? I will leave it for the Q&A session. She departed Karachi on 9th April and reached Bombay on 12th April, uneventful, except that one day after leaving Karachi, the fish and fish manure which was kept in hold number 1 turned rancid. It left a nauseating stench, but because the ship was at sea and cross ventilation was possible, living conditions were tolerable. 12th April 1944, she entered Bombay. This is a Google view of the eastern seaboard of Bombay, which shows all the docks. The three docks of Bombay Port Trust: Princess Dock, Victoria Dock, Alexandra Dock. This is Sassoon Dock, which is actually a fishing dock, no more used for loading, unloading of cargo. This, what you see here, is the naval dockyard, then called the Bombay Dockyard, which belonged to the East India Company and later the British Crown. This is a blown up view of Princess Dock, Victoria Dock, and Alexandra Dock. This dock will mainly be restricted to these three docks now, because this was the main wet docks of Bombay Port Trust. What were the regulations for handling of explosives and dangerous cargo in Bombay? Before 1939, these were the regulations. Any ship carrying hazardous cargo, which was ammunition, explosives, or even bunkering, they flew a red flag at the mast. This was to indicate to other ships in the vicinity that she was carrying dangerous cargo and others have to exercise caution. Before 1939, very little ammunition came to Bombay. But once Second World War started, things became different. So prior to 1939, in the docks, neither could you offload ammunition or explosives, neither could they be stored. So the little quantity of ammunition which came into Bombay by ships were offloaded in lighters. This is again a representative image of a lighter. This is a ship offloading into lighters. Lighters are small crafts which can be propelled, which cannot be propelled, and they, using the ship's crane, the cargoes offloaded into lighters, and then the lighters are then towed into the docks. In the case of ammunition or explosives, nothing could be offloaded into the three docks. They were offloaded at Haji Bandar. Now, this was fine during peacetime, but once war broke out in 1939, and Bombay being an important staging post for the British, the amount of ammunition which came into Bombay increased 4 times. Now, not offloading ammunition and explosives in the docks was not acceptable. Similarly, ammunition, explosives could not be taken to Haji Bandar and then onto loaded wagons, because what happened was most ships, when they came at anchorage and had to offload ammunition, lighters were perpetually in short supply. Secondly, the cranes on the ship didn't have the lifting capacity as shore-based cranes. So invariably, ships missed the convoy departures, and therefore the government then decided that this rule will have to be slightly modified. And the modification was, under the Defense of India rules of 1939 and under Rule 88, ships carrying ammunition did not have to fly Flag Bravo. There is a very practical reason for this, because any ship carrying and discharging, loading ammunition, and flying black flag Bravo became an juicy target for enemy operators. It was as good as saying, "Come hit me." So this practice of flying flag Bravo was waived off because of safety regulations. Ammunition which could only be offloaded at Haji Bandar, this was also modified. Ships coming into Bombay, if they were given a certificate of agency by embarkation headquarters. Now, embarkation headquarters is a tri-service organization which came up in every port, and they had a detachment of Indian Army ordnance officers. So a ship entering Bombay, a representative from the embarkation headquarters would come on board, examine the cargo, and if he thought that this was important and had to be offloaded into the wet docks, then a certificate of urgency was given by which ships carrying explosives could enter the dock. However, there were certain restrictions. Category A explosives were the most dangerous, which would explode on detonation. They could be brought inside the docks, but had to be offloaded in lighters and taken away. They could not be stored in the docks. Category B ammunition, which exploded on combustion, was also dangerous, but not as dangerous as category A explosives. They could be offloaded into railway wagons, which were positioned on the jetty, and the wagons had to be taken away. Ammunition could not be stored in the docks. That was the operative condition. Category C explosives, which were relatively safe, they could be offloaded into wagons and stored in the docks. Steichen, however, the port trust was not very happy with this arrangement, and they requested the government of India that in case an accident resulted where they were not directly responsible for mishandling, then they should be indemnified. This was a condition under which the port trust accepted this waiver. On arrival, a pilot from the Bombay Port Trust and Major Hawks of embarkation headquarters boarded the Steichen. After examining the explosives, he gave a certificate of urgency, and Steichen could then enter the wet docks. This is again a representation of the docks: Princess Dock, Victoria Dock, and Alexandra Dock. Steichen was allocated a berth in Victoria Dock, berth number 1. This is where she would eventually come and tie up. Once a certificate of urgency was given, Steichen weighed anchor and made her way into Victoria Dock. Bombay, in her long history, was privy to ships, explosives, cotton, ammunition, fire, and senseless death. And on the forenoon of 12th April, when Steichen with a deadly cargo made her way into Victoria Dock and took up a pre-assigned berth, the stage was set for a devastating encore. Steichen tied up alongside around noon on 12th April. Between 12th and 13th April, the following happened. During the wartime, it was a standard procedure for every ship which came on the jetty. The Bombay Auxiliary Fire Service crew would come with a pump trailer. A word about the Bombay AFS. The Auxiliary Fire Service was set up as part of the Air Raid Precaution Unit in 1941. The Air Raid Precaution Unit was a part of the Civil Defense Organization, and it had 4 units. It had the ambulance service, it had the auxiliary fire service, it had canteen facilities, and it also had the salvage facilities. This was set up in 1941. In 1943, the threat of an air attack in Bombay was minimal, and Bombay was placed as a white area. This resulted in the central government advising the Bombay government that because Bombay was a white area and white designated as a white area and the threat of air attack was minimal, the Air Raid Precaution Unit should be downsized as a measure of economy. So accordingly, the ambulance service, the canteen service, and the salvage service were disbanded. The central government also wanted the AFS to be disbanded, but the government of Bombay insisted that at least 25% of the crew should be retained. There was a lot of messages which went up and down, and ultimately the central government relented, and Bombay auxiliary fire service with 25% of the crew were retained. The rationale behind this was, by this time, many industrial units had come up in Bombay, and each of these industrial units and factories had their own fire pumps. The government of Bombay then made a notification that in case of an emergency, all these fire pumps, which actually totaled 229, could be placed at the disposal of the AFS to fight any eventuality. Unfortunately, they specify this emergency as enemy hostile action. Mr. Desai, who was the foreman of stevedores, received the ship with 5 gangs. A gang is a group of laborers. The stevedores were divided into gangs, and each gang had about 5 or 7 laborers with a supervisor. Mr. Desai, who was the foreman of stevedores, received the ship when she tied up alongside. Unfortunately, the agents had not briefed Mr. Desai that the ship was carrying ammunition, because of which no lighters or wagons were requisitioned. Remember, Category A, Category B, and Category C explosives could be offloaded either into lighters or wagons. But because Mr. Desai was not briefed by his agents, neither did he requisition lighters nor he requisitioned wagons. The ordnance rep, who was supposed to brief the stevedores on the disposal of these explosives, was absent, because of which no explosives were offloaded between 12th and 13th. The certificate of urgency which was given to Steichen actually made no sense. The ship staff was very keen that the gold which was kept on board should be disposed of. But the Reserve Bank of India, who were the consignees of the bank, refused to accept the gold, because this gold in wooden crates was kept in an iron safe, and around the iron safe were placed the explosives. The bank insisted on accepting it along with the safe. Unfortunately, since the safe was welded onto the bulkhead of the ship, it required welding. And because explosives were placed around the safe, no gold, the safe could not be removed, and no gold was taken away by RBI. They would rue that decision. The fish menace, which I told you, in harbor, this made the living conditions very, very unbearable. So the ship staff requested Mr. Desai that since gold and ammunition and cotton were not being offloaded, if they could remove the fish. So the entire concentration of the stevedores were in removing the fish from the ship before the lighters and the wagons came. The ordnance officer visited the ship only in the forenoon of 13th and briefed Mr. Desai on disembarking the ammunition. In short, Steichen was in harbor for 24 hours and no ammunition, no cotton, no explosives were disembarked. So much for certificate of urgency. Ultimately, rail wagons and lighters were placed alongside the ship only by 3 p.m. on 13th April, well over 24 hours after the ship had berthed. On 14th April, when the engineer officer went to check his engines, he found a defect. He found a major defect in the engines. The intermediate slide valve, which is an important part of the main engine, which permits steam to come into the combustion chamber, was defective. What it meant was carrying emergency repairs to the intermediate slide valve, because of which the main engines of the ship would not be available. In short, for any reason, if the ship had to move on its own power, that was not feasible. By 12:30 on 14th April, 1,400 tons of cargo were disembarked. It started on 12th afternoon. By 12:30, 1,400 tons were disembarked, and this is what was disembarked in that period. Only 400 tons of explosives. Steichen had 1,395 tons, only 400 were removed. 12:30, the stevedores broke for lunch, and at 12:30, this was the position of ships in the Princess and Victoria Dock. Victoria Dock, full house, 14 ships. Princess Dock, near full house, 12 ships. So in Princess and Victoria Dock, there were 26 ships. Before we go on to this was where the Steichen was. Right across the Steichen was a sister ship, Port Trevier, and behind her was a ship called SS Iran. This distance was about 1,000 feet, and behind her was a Scindia ship called Jalapadma. These ships are important because they'll play an important part later. 12:30 to 1:30, lunch break. The stevedores and the watchmen who were employed all left for their lunch. And inadequate watchkeeping on Steichen, because between 12:30 and 1:30, the stevedores, of course, left. All the 5 watchmen, instead of having staggered breaks, they all left together. What it meant was there was nobody keeping watch on the upper deck of Steichen. At around 12:30, from the Steichen, and from the number 2 hold, some amount of smoke was seen coming upwards. This was noticed by an officer on Fort Trevier, who had come up after his lunch on the upper deck for a smoke. 2 sailors from the Shah of Iran also saw this smoke. Steichen was not flying flag Bravo, so they had no idea of what was being carried on Steichen. And their understanding was if they had seen this whiff of smoke coming from number two hold of Steichen, then it was quite obvious that the ship crew would have also seen it. So they kept quiet, made didn't inform anybody. Right behind Steichen was the Green Gate. It doesn't exist now. And Inspector Pritchell, I mean, right behind the Shah of Iran, sorry, was the Green Gate of Victoria Dock. Doesn't exist now. And on the watchtower, what Mr. Sub Inspector Pritchell of Bombay Police was on duty. He also noticed this whiff of smoke coming out from the number two hold. He had the same conclusion. If he had seen it, it was quite obvious that people on Steichen would have also have seen it. So he made no report, kept mum. "1:30, it was business as usual when the stevedores came back and unloading started. Once unloading was at 1:30 in the afternoon, this was the position of cargo on Steichen. I put this color code because it might not be possible for you all to know it. Number one hold, some ammunition in number one hold. Green is cotton, yellow is sulfur, dark yellow is sulfur, and light yellow is miscellaneous items. So in number one hold, you had some ammunition, you had cotton, you had sulfur, and you had miscellaneous items as scrap iron, timber, etc. Number two hold, you had ammunition. In the upper part of the hold, lower part of the hold also you had ammunition, you had cotton, and you had miscellaneous items, which was timber, scrap iron, etc. Hold number three, you had lubricating oil. Upper hold was empty, lower hold you had lubricating oil. Number four hold, ammunition in the upper part of the hold, ammunition and cotton in lower part of the hold. Please note the amount of ammunition in number four hold was more than twice the ammunition in number one hold. In number four hold, you had cotton and you had those miscellaneous items, timber, etc., both above and below cotton. 400 tons of cargo removed. This was the disposition of the balance of cargo in the 5 holds of Steichen. When work resumed and unloading started, fire was first noticed in number 2 hold by the stevedores. In the lower hold of the Steichen, they saw smoke coming out, and which was a sure indication of fire. Stevedores are not trained to fight fire, so one by one they started. It was quite a melee where they made enough noise and came out of the hold. And as they came out of the hold, they alerted the ship staff and others who were on the gangway. They started making their way from the ship onto the jetty. The gangway is sort of a horizontal plank which gives access from the jetty onto the ship. The entire lot of stevedores who were working in the other holds also, they all joined, and there was a stampede at the gangway. The minute the auxiliary fire service crew heard about this alarm of fire, the assistant sub leader and the leader started putting the fire hoses on the jetty and on the gangway, but because of the stampede at the gangway, about 40 odd people coming down and two of them trying to go up, they found it very difficult to go. The sub-leader also told the assistant sub-leader to go to the nearest shed and inform the port trust fire station that a ship carrying ammunition was on fire, and they had to there was a code. He told him to pass the number 2 message. The number 2 message meant that a ship carrying ammunition was on fire. But the assistant sub leader, when he reached the shed, there was a, he couldn't get to the telephone. At last, when he got to the telephone, it was one of those telephones which didn't have a dial tone. Those old telephones, you pick up the phone, wait for the exchange to come on line, and then pass the message. The minute he didn't hear a dial tone on the phone, he thought the phone was dead, kept the phone down, came out of the shed, and he saw the fire alarm system on the jetty. He broke the glass, sounded the alarm. What this meant was there was a fire on a ship. It didn't indicate the gravity of the fire, because of which, hearing the alarm, the fire station in Victoria Dock sent 2 fire tenders. Between 1:50 and 2:30, 2 fire tenders came. When the fire tenders came, and the gentleman in charge of the fire tenders came to know that this was a ship carrying ammunition, that is the time when around 2:50 this message was passed to the port trust authorities that the ship having ammunition was passed. So see the time delay. The whiff of smoke was seen at 12:30. Positive identification of fire at 1:45. The number 2 message went off only at 2:50. The people who were assembled on the AFS crew and the fire tender crew and the ship's crew made 2 attempts to determine the seat of fire. When you fight any fire, it is important to know the seat of fire. Because of the fire which had spread and the holes were full of smoke, the first attempt made by the firemen to enter the hole and look for the seat of fire was nullified because of the smoke. They had not worn the smoke mask. The second attempt which was made, they wore the smoke mask, but the fire had spread and the heat was so much that they just couldn't enter the number 1 hole. And unfortunately, in 1944, firemen didn't have heat-resistant costume, because of which they were pumping water into the number 2 hole without actually attacking the seat of fire. Eleven hoses were pouring water into the number 2 hole without having no knowledge of where the seat of fire was. Water was just being pumped into the hole and hoping like hell they would get to the seat of fire. It's not that they could not, no attempts were made, but they didn't have the equipment to go down and actually identify the seat of fire. This happened between 1:15 and 2:30. Captain B.T. Oberst, who was part of the Indian Army Ordnance team attached to the embarkation headquarters, hearing the number 2 message, came on board, and this is what his observation was. He got in touch with the ship's officers, had a look at the loading plan. And once he had a look at the loading plan, this is what he told the ship staff. This is a bit of grandstanding because the embarkation headquarters team knew the explosives which were on board. No explosives were offloaded between 12th and 13th. So this remark has to be taken with a pinch of salt. Hearing the number 2 alarm, the who's who of the port trust reached Steikin's berth. And these were the people who were involved in the discussions at what should be the next course of action. And between 2:30 and 2:50, this is, they were all huddled together to actually see what could be done to combat this fire. They were discussing the options. The first option was to move Steikin out of this congested dock using her own power. But that unfortunately was not possible because remember, her main engines were under repair and Steikin could not move under her own power. The second option was having it towed out. But that day, there were 12 ships which were under movement in Alexandra Dock and Princess Dock. And no ship and no tug could be spared to tow out Steikin. The third option was scuttling the ship. Scuttling the ship is forcibly grounding her. You drill holes in the bottom of the ship and let water come in. She becomes unstable and settles to the bottom of the settles down at the seabed. Unfortunately, this option was also ruled out for the simple reason that from the keel to the height where explosives were kept, the total height was about 28 feet 3 inches. And between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock, because it was a flood tide, the depth of water in Victoria Dock would only be about 27 feet, which means even if the ship was sitting at the bottom, the top line of explosives would not be underwater. So this was also ruled out. So between 2:30 and 2:50, nothing much happened. There was no major decision taken, but the firefighting on Steikin continued. Some detonators were placed in number 1 hold, which was against the common bulkhead of number 1 and number 2 hold. That was removed and positioned at the far end of the hold. Once the number 2 message was passed, a total of 13 fire tenders joined in. They were also joined in by 2 water boats of Port Trust. 32 hoses poured nearly 900 tons of water in number 2 hold without determining the seat of fire. So they were hoping like hell this huge quantity of water which went inside would somehow reach the seat of fire and extinguish it. But nothing happened. All that happened was because of this huge quantity of water going in, Steikin started listing to starboard. Starboard is right, left is port, right is starboard. And this is what, when a ship is listing, she becomes unstable and gets onto one side. Every danger of the ship toppling. And because of which additional lines were passed from the ship to the shore, she started listing to starboard. When she started listing to starboard, the port side started coming up. So this is how she looked went with a list to starboard. This is the starboard side. She comes down. The port side comes up. This actually was advantageous because remember, the fire was in the number two hold. This is a blown up things view of the number two hold. The upper hold and the lower hold. This was the seat of fire. The minute she listed to starboard, this part came up and it became visible to the crew. This was visible because the hull of the ship, the paint which was on the hull of the ship started flaking and a crack appeared. And this crack in about 5 minutes spread to about 9 feet. This was a possible indication of the seat of fire. All that was required now was to drill a hole on the ship side, a hole large enough for the hoses to be put inside and attack the seat of fire, which meant that the ship side had to be cut by gas cutting equipment. There was one of the fire tenders had the gas cutting equipment. The gas cutting equipment was assembled, and when they went on to attempted to start the gas cutting machine, no flame came out because of incorrect mixture. It was a defective gas cutting equipment. The minute Mr. Coombs, who was the fire officer, saw this, he requested a replacement from Mazagon docks and also told the Bombay Fire Brigade to inform Mrs. Alok Ashton and Co., who were the suppliers to the Bombay Fire Brigade, to send in additional gas cutting equipment. The seat of fire was located. All that it required was an efficient gas cutting machine to drill a hole in the ship side by which they could access the seat of fire. But defective gas cutting equipment, they could not drill a hole. The replacements never came. The replacements from Alok, Ashdown and Co. never came. The one which was requisitioned came late and it came with the first explosion. This is what happened between 3:30 and 3:50. Time was running out of the striking because this was the last desperate measure to cut a hole. They could not do it because the equipment was faulty. And because of the intense fire in the number two hold, the upper deck was getting heated. And the amount of water which went inside, some of this water would spill over. And when the water came in contact with the hot deck, steam started getting generated and the water was scalding water. But the firemen continued to fight. It was a losing cause, but they didn't give up. Normally, water is an antidote to fire. But in this case, all that water which went into the hole actually aided the fire. And this is how it was possible. The water which went in, because of the list to starboard, all that water which was poured into the number hole would enter and roll on to the starboard side. And as more and more water went into the starboard side, it started pushing this. This is cotton here. As more water went inside, it started pushing this cotton down. When the cotton started when it was pushed down, this part came up. This here, cotton which was already on fire started closing this gap. This gap was about 6 feet. And as more and more water was pushed, and it rolled down to the starboard side. This side came up. And this is where category A ammunition was kept. As the fire started getting closer and closer to the deck, the ammunition caught fire. Explosives in wooden crates were kept, between wooden crates, there was dunnage. Dunnage is thin strips of wood which were kept between boxes so that, there was no friction between the boxes. As the source of heat started rising, the dunnage caught fire. That is, the thin wooden strips surrounding the explosives caught fire. The minute the dunnage caught fire, the ammunition caught fire. And when the ammunition caught fire, black smoke started coming out from the hatch. This was an indication that the ammunition had caught fire. And along with this flames, burning pieces of cotton were thrown up into the air. Between 3:50 and 6 minutes past 6. As the ammunition caught fire, a great tongue of flame came out, shoots up. When the captain saw that the ammunition had caught fire, he knew it's a lost cause and he gave the order to abandon ship. This was the most unfortunate part. When the ship had, when this was going on Styki, a typical Indian habit of people gathering on the quayside to see this tamasha. No effort was made by the port trust authorities to clear people because by this time they knew that Styki is going to blow up. But no effort was made to clear this mob, neither warn the ships in vicinity about this explosion because they had no idea the kind of cargo Styki was carrying. And as this bales of cotton were thrown up, the sheds on the jetty caught fire. After the captain given the order to abandon ship, Captain Naismith, who was the master of the ship, went around the ship to make sure that people had cleared off. And when he was taking his rounds of the ship, he saw number 4 hold was kept open. In all this action which was happening in number 2 hold, people had forgotten about the number 2 hold, and instead of closing the hatch, the hatch remained open, and number 4 hold at 784 tons of bomb, incendiary bombs. Captain Naismith was the last to leave the ship, and when he left the ship, he was met. When he descended down the gangway, he was met at the jetty by Mr. Henderson, who was his chief officer, and Mr. Stevens, who was a marine surveyor. In a pensive mood and in utter silence, they started moving away from the ship. And when they were abreast of the stern of the ship, they saw 2 vehicles going past them towards the ship. One was the driver of Mr. Coombs, who was the chief fire officer. We went looking for him. The second vehicle had the gas cutting team, which was requisitioned from Mazagon Docks earlier. In that pensive state of mind and half-day state, they made no effort to stop these 2 vehicles from going on to their death. It was an afternoon full of courage, and courage mingled with human errors. One tiny error piled on another, and they all combined together to push the men who were involved in the docks to the final disaster. Now the final mistake was made and there was time for no other. The clock at the port traffic office building, which was next to the entrance of the Princess and Victoria dock, the same clock which gives these two docks its name, its colloquial name, Ghadial Godi, was a mute witness to the successive errors made in the afternoon. And as the hands of the clock stood at 6 minutes past 4 p.m., it remained stuck there for many more months as a grim reminder of one of the most devastative and destructive explosions the world had known as the Steichen blew up. The Steichen blew up at 4:06 p.m. With the first explosion, the forward part of the ship sheared off, skidded about 30 yards, and then sank. The aft part, the rear part of the ship remained stubbornly buoyant and floating. The aft part had the number 4 hold. Burning cotton and hot metal which was thrown up into the air entered the number 4 hold through the open hatch, and it had double the explosives of number 2 hold. The second explosion occurred at 4:33 p.m. Two explosions, the first one at 6 minutes past 4, the second explosion because of the explosives, number 4 hold at 4:33 p.m. The first explosion was a lateral explosion. Let me explain this because most of the explosives were below the water line. So it was more of a lateral explosion. A tsunami was created and the damage was largely restricted to the the Victoria and Princess dock. Very little of this was because very little of the debris fell outside the port area. The second explosion with those incendiary bombs was a vertical one in the sense burning iron, explosives, timber, metal, scraps of iron were thrown up 3,000 feet into the air. And because the sea breeze had already set in, it went towards the towards Frere Road and beyond Frere Road into where the godowns were. The damage which was caused outside of the dock area was largely because of the second explosion. But the second explosion was more devastating than the first explosion. This is we look at this first. This is the Princess and the Victoria dock. This radius of 900 yards, this circle was where the damage was. Princess dock, Victoria dock, Alexandra dock partly. This is P. Demella Road or Frere Road. The godowns were on east of this road and the residential area. This is another view of the same place, but this is a better picture. And this is what happened inside Princess and Victoria dock. Most ships came off the mooring, and this is where the Steichen was. This ship, which was immediately behind Steichen, it was a 400-ton ship of the Scindias called Jalapadma. It was lifted 50 feet into the air, turned at right angles, and came down on the jetty. The fall was so the fall was so strong that it broke the keel of the ship and it lay across the jetty. All other ships came off its moorings. Just a minute. some images of what happened in the Princess Victoria Dock and the adjacent area. This was the first image which was captured, an aerial view of ground zero, that is Victoria Dock. This is the Port Tower building, the port traffic building which I spoke about. This is Jalapadma. This is the St. Xavier School at Dhobitalau. A part of one of the ship's propeller flew from Victoria Dock and landed in St. Xavier's School, and this is preserved there in St. Xavier's School even today at Dhobitalau. The gold bars. This is again representative. This was not the gold bars of Steichen, but again representative. The Bombay Chronicle on 22nd April made a report that all the gold bars which were lost, which were lost by the ship, was recovered. I think this is a little far-fetched because I don't think all the gold bars were recovered. And we still don't know as to how many gold bars were recovered and how many were lost. This is a newspaper report of Mahatma Gandhi visiting the Victoria Dock on 20th May 1944. Because of wartime, censorship was already in force. This tragedy was underplayed by Indian newspapers. However, 22nd May, the 22nd May issue of Life magazine is the first publication which actually brought out the amount of destruction and mayhem that was caused. A commission of inquiry was held to go into the causes of the accident, and the inquiry commission was headed by Leonard Stone, who was the then Chief Justice of Bombay, assisted by Justice Dhavle, who was the presiding judge of the Patna High Court, and assisted by two naval officers, Admiral Holland and Admiral Bayfield. The inquiry commission examined 259 witnesses sworn to secrecy. The hearings were held in camera at the Legislative Council premises. The report was in two parts: action taken before and during the disaster and causes which led to the first explosion. Part 2 is actions taken after the first explosion. The inquiry commission didn't go into the losses sustained by ships and outside of the port trust and the insurance claims. There was a separate commission set for that. The findings of the commission, this is actually it's a summation of what I said so far. The actual cause of ignition is still not known. Circumstantial evidence said it was an accidental ignition of cotton in number 2 hold. I'll quickly run through it. I know we are running short of time. This was an accident caused not because of hostile enemy action. It was because of this explosion, accidental explosion, which went off. If it had happened during the wartime, an entire organization would kick into force, But since this happened, this was a result of an accident in the port trust and not because of enemy action, this was a totally new thing, an unprecedented thing. And there was a total absence of somebody taking charge of it and controlling it. And this has been brought out beautifully by the Home Secretary in his disposition before the commission. And this is what he had to say. It is not that there were no efforts made. It was that most of the organization at times were working at loggerheads because there was no laid down procedure to take action in case of an emergency like this. The casualties, this is as per the commission report. The exact figures will never be known. This, the commission makes it very clear that they will not be known. This is people who they could positively identify and conclude that so many were killed, so many were injured. But the commission makes a very telling statement that the exact figures will never be known. Casualties and damages, material losses. Victoria Dock completely destroyed. Princess Dock partially damaged. Alexandra Dock unaffected, largely unaffected. The area around the docks, 300 acres, were gone. An entirely different commission was set up to go into the compensation losses, and this is the total compensation paid. The amount of debris which was collected from the Princess Victoria Dock and the neighboring area had to be disposed of. This is Victoria Dock. The debris was strewn around Bandar and along the Sivri Fort Road. This area is blown up here. This is Bandar here, and this is along the Sivri Fort Road. The total debris in both these areas was 800,000 tons. The reconstruction of the Princess Victoria Dock and the 300 acres of area around it is a different, it requires a different lecture because it was a stupendous effort. Within 6 months, the docks were brought into service, and within 1 year, all the neighboring area that was damaged was reconstructed. The entire work was undertaken by the Indian Army. And this is what Mr. Ratcliffe, who was the vice president of the Bombay Chamber of Commerce, had to say about the reconstruction. Possibly, if it was not wartime, it could not have been done so fast. But because it was wartime and Bombay was an important staging ground, a staging port for the Allied forces, it could be done in 6 months. The response of the authorities was absolutely callous. But Bombay, being Bombay, it is the ordinary citizens who came to the fore. There are many instances of this brought out by John Innes in his book on Bombay Dock explosion. There will be no time to go through it, but I will go through some of the individuals or organizations which came into force. Mr. Ali Muhammad Mackay and was the treasurer of the civilian hospital emergency aid, and he knew that very soon hospitals would run out of medicines. So he hired a taxi, went around Bombay for 7 hours, met most of the chemists and druggists in South Bombay, most of them who knew him, and requested them to donate medicines and drugs which would be required by the hospitals. Most of the chemists gave it to him free of cost. Some of them gave it at cost price. He collected the entire thing and handed it over to JJ Hospital, which was a nodal hospital for looking after all those people who were injured. He insisted on paying his taxi driver, but the taxi driver refused to take it. But when he insisted, the taxi driver took the money. After he had dropped McLeod, he went to the nearest chemist, picked up medicines, and handed from the money he had received from Mr. McLeod, and he handed it over to JJ Hospital. 5 women of the American Red Cross, the names are given as this. They were part of the American Red Cross attached to the St. George's Hospital. And they knew that inside the Victoria Dock, where the army was fighting the fire, that they would require refreshments so that work could go on unabated. They hired a ambulance, filled it up with refreshments, drove through Victoria Dock, and they were stopped at the entrance of the fire ground by a major who was in charge of the firefighting. He said that it was dangerous for them to go further. He would send these 5 firemen one by one, and so that they could refresh themselves and go back. But these 5 nurses insisted that that would lead to loss of time, and they prevailed upon him to enter the area and set up the canteen. They set up the canteen between 2 warehouses, one which had cotton on fire and the other full of paint. And they set up their shop between these 2 warehouses and stayed there till the last of firemen were served refreshments. Naik Wahid Bakshi of the Indian Army Ordnance Corps was in charge of a party which was given the task of clearing broken acid bottles from a warehouse. It had about 1,000 odd acid bottles. The top layer, because of the explosion, had broken, and acid was leaking on to the bottles downstairs. Without having any protective gear, he and 5 of his men cleared the warehouse of all the acid bottles. Mr. Gurjotji Kawalji Motiwala, this I think is everybody's favorite story of the efforts of individuals contributing to the firefighting measures and others. He was a retired civil engineer from Bombay dying, living at Kukana House at Girgaon. When the first explosion took place, he along with his family vacated from their 3rd floor apartment and came down to the ground floor. When the second explosion took place, from the road he saw a huge hole in the corrugated roof of his balcony. So he went up to check whether his flat had sustained any damage. When he entered the house and went to the balcony, he saw a shiny piece of metal, and it was surrounded with debris. When he cleared the masonry and the debris, it was a piece of metal. It was the same gold bar from Steichen which had landed accidentally onto his balcony. It had the hallmark of the Bank of England, and it had a serial number. It said 13256. Knowing that this is government property, he took the metal, the piece of metal, went over to the Bombay Police Commissioner's office at Crawford Market and handed over this piece of gold. The police were impressed with his honesty and said they would request the government to give him a suitable reward. He was being a government award. The reward took its time in coming. And when he received this reward of 999 rupees, a princely amount, in 1944, he donated the entire money to the Governor's Relief Fund. This talk would be incomplete if I didn't say something about the firemen. In this image, you find this firefighting mission, this fire tender. This is one of them which is preserved and in the Baikla Fire Brigade. This was used in April 1944. The two gentlemen here, Mr. Meherwanji, who was a young fireman with the AFS, and Mr. Coombs, who was the chief of the Bombay Fire Brigade. Later on, Mr. Meherwanji went on to be the chairman, to be the chairman of the Bombay Fire Brigade, and between 1978 to 1982, and that was the time Mr. Coombs visited Bombay. And this is a photograph of Mr. Meherwanji and Mr. Coombs in 1982. No mistakes were committed. It is, in the docks, the firemen came into their own and rose to the occasion to prevent the spread of fire from the congested areas of the godowns and the residential areas east of Muhammad Ali Road. For 3 days and 3 nights, the firemen fought the fire and ensured that it didn't spread west of Muhammad Ali Road. If that fire had spread west of Muhammad Ali Road, you can imagine what would have happened. Rustam Palamkot, he was the fire officer of the Victoria Fire Station and the first Indian fire officer in charge of a fire brigade. He was leading the team on board the Steikin, and even after when Steikin was, when the deck was red hot and Steikin was about to blow up, he didn't leave his post, and he was one of the first people who perished in the first explosion. His body was identified only by the buttons which he wore, because the torso had been ripped open, and because of these buttons, he could be identified. He personally, despite being the fire officer of the fire station, he led his men personally in trying to douse the fire on the Steikin. The city didn't forget it. In December 1944, his son, this is his son, this is Mr. Butt, who was a municipal commissioner. A plaque was given to his son as a memory of his father. This gentleman here is Mr. Meherwanji's younger brother, who was also a fire officer in the Bombay Fire Brigade. The two memorials which were set up in memory of this fireman, the one on the left is the Bombay Fire Brigade, set up in 1946, largely due to the efforts of Mr. Coombe. And this is the one in Bombay Port Trust, which was inaugurated by the Chief Minister on 14th April 1971. Both are still standing. 3 years earlier, to commemorate 14th April, the government of India announced that the week commencing 14th April would be the Fire Week, would be celebrated as Fire Week in memory of all those firemen who had lost their lives. Epilogue. This is the Port Traffic Office building which I spoke about, and this is the clock which actually indicated the exact time of the first explosion. And what you see here is how Victoria and Princess Dock look. It's filled up. A part of Bombay has been lost forever. This was filled up between 2007 and 2009. This talk would be incomplete without thanking a whole lot of people who helped me in researching and putting up this talk. Their names are as given on the slide. I finished. Thank you. Sorry, I went past my scheduled time. Mr. Tarapur, will you have time for questions or I've overshot?
We have a couple of questions. If you could just reply to them.
Okay.
First and foremost, it's an absolutely fantastic presentation and narration. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Mrs. Tarapur.
Then,
sorry, I overshot.
That's okay. Amrita Shah said, reason for incorrect storage at Karachi.
Yes. All those regulations which existed were for peacetime. In wartime, a lot of regulations are given the go. You just overlook those regulations, especially cotton. Now, Bombay, India were clothiers to the Allied troops, which means the uniforms of the troops were made in India. Cotton was an important commodity from in Punjab and Sindh. Unfortunately, the mills were all in Bombay. The British were paranoid about sending cotton from Karachi to Bombay by train or road because they feared pilferage. So any and every ship coming from Karachi to Bombay were told to embark maximum cotton. Yes, looking back, it should not have been done, but exigencies of war. In wartime, a lot of regulations which are followed in peacetime are overlooked. And it's not that the officers and the men on Steikin did not know what they were doing was incorrect, but every ship which went from Karachi to Bombay, always carried cotton. And explosives and ammunition was important because Bombay was a staging post for Burma operations. This was April 1944. Towards the end of 1944 was when Burma operations actually started. And Bombay was an important staging post. That's why all the ammunition came in to Bombay. So yes, you look at rules and regulations, it was incorrect. It was incorrect on the part of the captain on not insisting on carrying on this kind of loading, but exigencies of war, as they say. I hope I've answered that query.
Yes, sir. There was another question. Was there a reason why the film made by Sudesh Ghatak of this explosion and its aftermath blocked, and is true that the seismic monitoring station in Shimla picked up the explosion?
Yes, the seismic station in Shimla picked up, and I think it was 7.4 on the Richter scale. The movie which you saw in the beginning, it was taken by a photographer of Times of India, but because censorship was in force, Second World War on, censorship was in force, this was confiscated by the government, and the clip which you saw on YouTube was actually made by the British, but the major source was the photographs which were taken by the Times of India photographer. So yes, you're absolutely right in that.
Okay. Jaideep Antani says, my father's office ICU was just opposite the port. He had miracle escape as he was on a site visit.
Providence. My father used to work for Burma Shell, and Burma Shell office was in construction house at Ballet Pier. He had visited the port around 1:30 in the afternoon and left at about 1:45. Fortunate that he survived.
I think that's all. The rest of them are just, glad to have learned about the blast, which I'd heard from my father. Exhaustive minute studies of so many aspects on such a pertinent subject. Very interesting, brilliantly researched. Thank you. Thank you for such a detailed and structured presentation. Brilliant talk, Narayan and MRC. So,
thank you very much.
So I think we can close the meeting now. Thank you so very much. truly was a very brilliant talk and very exhaustive, very, very well researched. So thank you again. And on behalf of the Mumbai Research Center of the Asiatic, I thank you, Cap.
Thank you, Mrs. Tarapur, and my apologies again for overshooting.
No. It was so interesting. I don't think anybody minded the little bit of overshooting. So absolutely no problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.